The night was colder than usual. A heavy silence hung in the air, broken only by the distant sound of wind rattling against the morgue's rusted door. Inside, beneath the dim flicker of a single fluorescent bulb, rows of steel drawers lined the walls, each holding someone who had taken their last breath. But tonight, something unnatural was about to happen. A small figure moved through the shadows, barely making a sound. He was just a child, 7 years old, but there was nothing ordinary about him. His little hands trembled as he clutched a tiny glass bottle, its contents glistening in the faint light. His heart pounded so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. He knew what he was about to do was wrong. He knew he wasn't supposed to be here, but he also knew that he had no other choice. Just hours ago, his world had been ripped apart. The person he loved most was gone, declared lifeless, covered with a white sheet, locked away in this very building. No one believed there was hope. No one thought a miracle was possible, but he did. With quiet, careful steps, he made his way to the cold metal table where the body lay still and motionless. He hesitated for a moment, staring at the face he knew so well, yet could barely recognize. His fingers curled tighter around the small bottle. He had waited for this moment. He had planned every detail. There was no turning back now. He unscrewed the cap, his breath shaky. The scent of the liquid stung his nose, sharp and unfamiliar. He didn't know exactly what it was. He only knew what he had been told. 3 drops. That's all it would take. His fingers trembled as he tipped the bottle forward. 1 drop. It landed on the pale skin like a tiny crystal. Another drop. The room felt like it was holding its breath. And then, the 3rd drop. For a second, nothing happened. The boy's stomach twisted in fear. Had he been wrong? Had he been lied to? His hands clutched the edge of the table as he leaned in, searching for any sign, any movement. And then, a sound, faint, a whisper of something shifting in the stillness. The air itself seemed to thicken as the silence stretched. The boy's breath hitched as his wide, terrified eyes stayed locked on the body before him. Then, fingers twitched, a single slow movement, barely there, but undeniable. The boy's pulse raced as his entire body went stiff. His mind screamed at him to run, but his feet wouldn't move. He could only watch as the impossible unfolded right in front of him. The hand twitched again, and then a breath. Shallow, strained, but real. The lifeless body on the table wasn't so lifeless anymore. The boy's grip tightened on the empty bottle. His lips parted, but no words came out. His world was spinning. This wasn't supposed to happen, or was it? And then, before he could make sense of it, before he could even react, the body moved, and then it opened its eyes. The boy's breath caught in his throat. His small hands clenched into fists as he stared at the impossible. Eyes that were once closed forever were now open, wide and unfocused. His heart pounded so loud he could hear it in his ears. The room felt heavier, the air thick with something. He couldn't explain. He wanted to speak, to say something, but the words wouldn't come. Then, the body on the table moved again. A slow, shaky breath filled the silent room, followed by a weak, almost inaudible exhale. The boy's legs felt frozen, his mind racing between fear and hope. Had he done it? Had the liquid worked? For weeks, he had held on to the small glass bottle, a gift from someone he barely knew but desperately trusted. A man with tired eyes, and a voice that sounded like the wind at night. 3 drops, he had said. 3 drops, and the impossible becomes possible. The boy hadn't believed it at first. How could he? He was just a child. lost in a world of adults who told him what was real and what wasn't. But when they told him there was no hope, when they told him there was nothing left to do, he refused to accept it. And now, here he was. The one who was supposed to be gone forever was breathing again. But something felt wrong. The boy took a shaky step back. The person on the table, the one he had loved more than anything, wasn't moving the way they used to. Their chest rose and fell, unevenly, their fingers twitching as if unsure how to work. Their eyes blinked, but there was no recognition in them, no warmth. The boy wanted to call their name, but fear held his tongue. Then, suddenly, a gasp, a deep, desperate inhale, as if the body had been underwater for too long and was finally coming up for air. The muscles in their neck tensed, their shoulders jerked, and then they sat up. The movement was too fast, too unnatural. The boy stumbled back, nearly knocking over a tray of metal instruments. The sharp clatter echoed in the room, but the person on the table didn't react. They just sat there, head tilted slightly, chest rising and falling like a machine trying to remember how to function. The boy's hands gripped the fabric of his shirt, his nails digging into his skin. He wanted to run, he wanted to scream, but he also wanted to believe. Maybe it was just taking time. Maybe they needed a moment to come back fully. But then, the head turned, slow, precise, eyes locking onto the boy, not with love, not with recognition, but with something else, something unreadable. A shiver ran down the boy's spine. He took another step back, his fingers brushing against the cold steel table behind him. This wasn't right. This wasn't them. Then, a sound, a deep guttural noise from the back of their throat, like they were trying to speak but had forgotten how. Their mouth opened slightly, lips trembling, but no words came out. The boy shook his head, his throat dry. "It's me," he whispered, barely able to hear his own voice. "Do you know me?" Silence. Then, suddenly, the body lurched forward. The boy barely had time to react before they were reaching for him, hands grabbing at the air between them. He stumbled backward, heart hammering against his ribs. His mind screamed for him to run, but his feet wouldn't move. "Stop," he cried, his voice shaking. "It's me, please." But there was no recognition in their eyes, no warmth, no love, only hunger, only something dark and unfamiliar. Tears burned in the boy's eyes, as the person he had fought so hard to bring back was no longer the person he had known. His body shook as realization settled deep in his chest. He had done something terrible, and now there was no undoing it. The person he had loved was gone, and in their place, something else had woken up, something that should have never come back. And then, with one slow, unsteady step, it moved toward him, closer and closer. The boy's breath hitched. He had made a mistake, a terrible, terrible mistake. And now, it was too late. The boy's body felt frozen, his mind screaming for him to move, but he couldn't. He could only watch as the person, no, the thing he had brought back, took another slow, staggering step toward him. Their limbs moved strangely, as if they were figuring out how to use them all over again. Their eyes never left his, dark and hollow, lacking the warmth he had once known. Tears welled in the boy's eyes. This wasn't supposed to happen. He had done everything just as he was told. 3 drops. That was all it took. 3 drops to bring them back. But this wasn't them. He took a shaky step back, his legs brushing against the cold metal table behind him. His breathing came in short, desperate gasps. "Please," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "It's me." The figure stopped, their head tilted slightly, almost as if they recognized the name, the voice, the face. The boy felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they were still in there. Maybe he could fix this. But then, their mouth opened and a sound escaped, a low, broken whisper, like wind passing through hollow bones. It wasn't a word. It wasn't a name. It was just empty. And then, in an instant, they lunged. The boy yelped, barely dodging as their hands swiped toward him. He stumbled, falling, backward onto the floor. His head hit the cold tiles, pain flashing through him. But he couldn't stop. He scrambled backward as fast as he could, pushing himself away. The figure followed, their steps unsteady, but their movements growing faster, more determined. "No, no, please," the boy cried, his voice cracking. His heart pounded so hard it hurt. He reached for anything at all, that could help him. His fingers grasped the edge of a metal tray, and in one desperate motion, he flung it forward. The clang of instruments hitting the floor echoed through the morgue. The figure hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. The boy pushed himself up and ran. His feet barely touched the ground as he sprinted toward the door, yanking it open and stumbling into the dimly lit hallway. His breath came in sharp gasps, his chest tight with panic. Behind him, he could hear footsteps, slow at first, then faster. He didn't dare look back. Down the hallway, past the empty offices, the flickering lights casting eerie shadows against the walls. His small legs burned with every step, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. The exit was just ahead. He could see the faint glow of streetlights seeping through the cracks of the door. If he could just get outside, if he could just make it out. But then, a sound, a low familiar voice, his name, spoken so softly, so gently, that he almost believed it was real. He stopped. His entire body went still. He turned. The figure stood in the middle of the hallway, just a few feet away. Their head was tilted, their dark eyes watching him. And then, again, his name. It was them. It had to be. Somewhere deep inside, they were still there. Tears ran down the boy's cheeks. "You know me," he whispered, his voice trembling. He took a hesitant step forward. "You remember me, don't you?" For a moment, silence. Then, a nod. Hope burst inside his chest. He took another step closer. "I'm here," he said softly. "It's okay now. I brought you back. You're safe." The figure remained still. Then slowly, their lips curled into a small, almost imperceptible smile. But something was wrong. It wasn't the kind of smile he remembered. It wasn't warm. It wasn't kind. It was something else. Something cold. Something unnatural. The boy's heart clenched. His breath hitched. He had made a mistake. A terrible mistake. And before he could react, before he could move, the figure lunged. The last thing the boy saw was the cold, hollow darkness in their eyes. And then, everything went black. The next morning, the morgue was quiet again. The workers arrived at their usual time, preparing for another day, completely unaware of what had happened the night before. The door to the storage room hung slightly open, a faint draft making its way through the halls. One of the attendants frowned, pushing it fully open. He peered inside, expecting to see nothing out of the ordinary. But the room was empty. No signs of struggle, no footprints, nothing broken, just a single small glass bottle lying on the cold, sterile floor. Its contents completely gone, and somewhere, Far beyond the walls of the morgue, lost in the depths of the waking world, two figures walked side by side. One small, one not quite human, and together they disappeared into the morning mist, never to be seen again.